So Scream 4 was directed by Wes Craven. Not only was this the last Scream movie he directed, but it was also the last movie he directed, period, before his passing. It was also written by Kevin Williamson, and it features Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette returning as their roles from the previous Scream movies, as well as featuring a few new faces, including Emma Roberts, Hayden Panettiere, Rory Culkin, and this time around, a new Ghostface killer emerges about a decade after the last Scream movie, just as Sydney is arriving back in Woodsboro for a stop on her book tour. So now it's up to Sydney, Dewey, and Gale to figure out what's going on, who's the new Ghostface killer, and protect the new group of kids, which includes Jill, Sydney's cousin, played by Emma Roberts. So Scream 4 was actually the Scream movie that made me go back to the original Scream movies and actually watch them for the first time, and because I thought Scream 4 looked fun, looked interesting, it looked scary, and I thought, why not go back and watch these original movies? And, I did. You can watch all my reviews for those movies. And Scream 4 is an interesting movie to me. Parts of it I really do like, but there are parts of it that I really don't care for. But overall, I do think it is a really good movie. It is a solid sequel. I don't know if I like this as much as Scream 2, but I definitely like it a lot more than Scream 3. So, what do I like about Scream 4? Well, the acting for the most part is pretty good. Neve Campbell gives a good performance kind of as this mentor to these new group of kids who are going through this whole thing. Courtney Cox is still doing really well as Gale. I thought she did a really good job in this movie, particularly in the first half of the movie. David Arquette is not as good, unfortunately, but it's kind of nice to see, Sheriff Dewey now getting promoted all those years. And among the new cast, the main standouts for me were Hayden Panettiere. I thought she was really good. She kind of reminded me of like a combination of Randy and Tatum a bit. I thought she did a really good job, and I'm so glad that she's going to be in Scream 6. Emma Roberts, I thought, when we find out what Emma Roberts is doing, I'll get to that. When we find Emma Roberts is particularly good, but I think in the last act, she's actually the best that she's been in this entire movie. And among the other standouts, I kind of liked Alison Brie in this movie. I don't know if it's because I was a big fan of the Community at that point, but seeing her in that movie was really cool. And also, she kind of played a character who was so unlike her character on that show, and she kind of plays this snarky girl who's like trying to basically piggyback on Sydney's success. That I thought was really good. And I do have this, I feel mixed about this one, but it doesn't feel like a lot of the Scream movies. It feels like it's a remake of the Scream movies, where it's like maybe it doesn't have like the exact, the same exact cues or motifs or really anything else that has been in other Scream movies, like, oh, this song that played in the first Scream movies is actually not in this movie. I thought that was kind of an interesting twist on this movie. And I also kind of like the killer reveal, mainly for Jill. But I like Jill's killer reveal, but I also like her motive as well. It's not really connected to Sydney and her past or anything like that. It's not really connected to her mother in any way. But it's also really twisted. And I also kind of just found it interesting that Sydney's coming back and she's mainly trying to protect Jill because, she's her cousin and everything. But it turns out it was Jill that we needed to fear the most. And I thought, Emma Roberts actually did a really good job in that scene. And I also kind of like the ending of this movie too, like the very last few seconds of this movie where everyone's saying Jill is the survivor of this whole thing, but it's clear that she's not. And it kind of gave her that success that she always wanted, even though she didn't really do anything good. It was just 15 minutes of fame all for nothing because she never got to experience it, and they were also just not reporting the truth. I thought that was very fascinating. And this movie kind of predicted a lot of things that social media has kind of done over the years, where people kind of upload these things and it's actually kind of really awful. And I do think it is very fascinating to look at, and like this movie kind of predicted a lot of things that we kind of see in social media now. And I do think it kind of holds up in retrospect. Ghostface in this movie is also a lot more brutal in this movie. Like, there are a lot of kills in this movie that I thought were really creative. And I feel like Ghostface also goes a little overboard at times. Like Alison Brie's death. First he stabs her, but then it's revealed. But then later on, he just throws her body and it's just it falls onto a truck. And it's like, that's just ridiculous and over the top. And I don't think we've ever seen a Ghostface killer do that. Usually they're just stab and run or something like that. This Ghostface is a lot more menacing. He's a lot more vicious, a lot more vulgar too. Like, just listening to the way he talks is definitely a lot more different. Kind of sounds the way people talked when I was in high school. That's eerie to me. That's just creepy to me. And I do think the movie doesn't reinvent itself in a lot of ways. Like, they kind of had this whole joke about how remakes kind of change things a lot. So the movie itself, we think this whole stab-a-thon is going to be the party, and that's where the whole final conflict is going to be. No, it's actually not. So it's going to trick you into thinking it's actually going to be at the house. No, it's actually going to trick you and it's going to be at a hospital, which admittedly I think that's kind of annoying. Usually, like multiple endings usually kind of annoys me with movies, but I do think in Scream 4 it does work. And I do think the opening scene of this movie is a lot of fun too, where it's like they're kind of basically it's revealed that the actresses who are in this movie are within movies. They're in the Stab movies that are in this universe. I thought that was kind of fun. And it kind of pokes a lot of holes in like a lot of these franchises that kind of just go off the rails and just kind of just don't know what to do with it. It's just kind of ridiculous. They joke about time travel. They joke about torture porn a lot, and it was fun. It was kind of funny, but like it didn't really add much to the whole universe. Like at least Scream 1, that scene was terrifying. Scream 2 it was kind of fun, but at the same time it was very tragic, and it still connected back to a larger story. And Scream 3, as much as I don't like Scream 3, I do like the opening scenes. Scream usually nails the opening scenes really well. And I do also think that Scream 4 is basically revenge for Scream 3 in a lot of ways, because that movie, they had to change a lot due to the Columbine tragedy, and Kevin Williamson had a lot of ideas that he wanted to do for that movie, but since he couldn't do a lot of those, it seems like a lot of the stuff in this movie is kind of revenge. Like, he wanted to set Scream 3 in Woodsboro, so now Scream 4 is in Woodsboro. And I think it's a lot more brutal than the other Scream movies, even Scream 1 and 2, but like, this movie is a lot more brutal. I think almost everyone in this movie died, but you can definitely tell like some of the deaths, like Jill and Kirby's friend, I forgot what her name was. I think it was Olivia, but you can definitely tell like when Sidney goes in a room, the death is like the blood is all over the place. There's intestines out. It's like, okay, that's just gross. It's like it just feels like that's kind of like making up for some of the lesser, bloodier kills in Scream 3 a bit. And it does have a lot of similar plot points to it. Mainly a relative of Sidney's is going after her when you find out what's going on. So that kind of makes up for a lot of it. So, was there anything that I didn't really like about Scream 4? Well, again, some things about it just kind of didn't feel like a Scream movie. Like, it kind of felt like... It kind of felt like a remake, so I guess I kind of can't be too mad about it that it doesn't really feel like it's a Scream movie, but it's more of a remake of a Scream movie, so maybe they didn't quite get like what Scream was about, but then again, it's from the people who made Scream, so I can't really complain too much about that. Also, I didn't really care that there wasn't really that much of an epilogue. Usually it's like, a minute long and like everyone's fine and such, but here, Jill's killed, and then that whole thing at the end is like, okay, this is what she's doing right. Okay, here's what happened. And the news crews are saying, she's a hero and such. And it's like, oh, the ending was really good, but I kind of wish there was more to the epilogue than just that. Also, Charlie as the killer. I mentioned Roman was one of my least favorite killers in the Scream series. Charlie is my least favorite killer in all the Scream series, because I think he does a lot of the killing in this movie. I feel like he was easily manipulated by Jill. I think she was the mastermind behind this whole thing. And I do think that, he's killed off pretty easily, and I think his motive is incredibly weak. I think he's just doing it just to get with Jill, and that's it. He's killed pretty early on in their, final plan by Jill, and just doesn't really work. I feel like the only people that Jill might have killed were, like, the police officers as well as her mother. Just that is just creepy enough. So, Charlie, I just think he also didn't really have that much personality. He didn't really have that much distinction from the other guy who was Robbie, I think. So it didn't really matter too much for me. Also, something that Scream 3 did that's kind of annoyed me is that they kind of made certain people suspects. Scream 4 does the same thing. They kind of make Jill's ex-boyfriend, Trevor, the suspect at one point. Judy also seems to be a suspect at one point, the police officer that seems to be hitting on Dewey, but Dewey doesn't get the hint, and Gail is obviously mad. But you can definitely tell that Judy's kind of creepy because she leans into Sidney while she's talking to her and says, like, I remember you. Don't you remember me? And it's like, you're trying way too hard to make us think you're the killer. It just doesn't really work. It kind of seemed better, like in Scream 1 and 2, where you could just guess that anyone could be the killer, and that's more effective. And also, a lot of the comedy doesn't work for me. Some comedy works, like whenever Hayden Panettiere says something funny. She's really funny in this movie. But some jokes are just really bad. Some lines are just plain old cringy. Like, there's this one towards the end by Judy, after she's shot and after Jill's been killed. They're like, hey, how are you still alive? And she goes, wear the vest, save the chest. And then she passes out. That was so dumb. That was really, really dumb. And also, I didn't really like a lot of the new characters too much. I felt like they were trying to focus a little too much on the new characters, but it seems like since their stories are kind of wrapped up, they kind of just didn't know where to go with it. I I still prefer Scream 4 over Scream 3, but I don't know if I like it as much as Scream 2 or even Scream 5. Scream 4 has its own moments. Like, again, the acting is really good. I do like the killer reveal for Jill. I do like a lot of the. I do like some of the performances, mainly Emma Roberts and Hayden Panettiere. I do like the opening scene. I do think there are fun, creative kills in this movie. Ghostface is a lot more brutal, but I also don't really like, you know, I don't really like Charlie as the killer. I don't like the comedy in this movie. It's not nearly as, I don't know if I would say it's as fun as the first two, but it's fine. I could still watch it. I still watch it whenever I go back and watch the Scream movies, so I'm not going to complain too much. But overall, it's fine. I like it enough to give it a pass. I'll give Scream 4 3 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what would you think? What would you think of Scream 4, and how would you rank the Scream movies? I may do that after Scream 6 comes out. So, comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.